Today in our reading workbook, we're going to be practicing using information from different sources to answer questions. Sometimes it's helpful to read the questions first when you're taking a reading test or when you have questions to answer based off of a text. So we're going to practice that strategy today. So the first question is, what idea do how we speak and what our vocal cords share? So we're looking for something that these two articles that we're going to read have in common. The next one says to choose a detail to support our answer. So not only do we have to know what they have in common, but we also have to know why, like what specific reasons they both have for having that in common, or what was said in each of them for that makes it common. The next one, let's see, I should move the camera instead of the book. Here we go. The next one says circle the word in the paragraph below that means capable of bending easily without breaking. Now, honestly, you could probably circle that right now without reading the text, but so that probably isn't going to come from a text, but these first two will. Then we have what information in what are vocal cords helps the reader understand why dogs can't speak as stated in Dogs and Birds Making Noises. So the first two questions deals with how we speak and what are vocal cords. And then the last question deals with what are vocal cords in Dogs and Birds. So we're probably going to stop after the first two and answer the first two questions, and then go back and read the dog one to answer the last question. That way it's fresher in our minds. All right, so we're going to start with the first article, which is how we speak. Speaking is possible because we have special parts in our bodies: lungs, throat, voice box, tongue, and lips. When we speak, we release air from our lungs. If we are going to speak a long sentence, our brains tell our bodies to push out a long puff of air. If we are speaking only a word or two, the puff will be smaller. This puff of air goes from the lungs through the larynx, which is made up of cartilage and muscle. So we can follow the path the air comes through our lungs and over our larynx, which is right here. So that's how this diagram is helping us understand what's going on. The larynx, often called the voice box, contains vocal cords that stretch across the opening. When the air passes through the vocal cords, they vibrate or move back and forth quickly and make a sound. All right, now we're going to read what are vocal cords. Seems like our first paragraph also talked about vocal cords, didn't it? Because it talked about the vocal cords being in the larynx. Let's go back to that. Let's go look at that again. It talked about the larynx contains the vocal cords that stretch across the opening. So the vocal cords are contained in the larynx, and those vibrate, and that's how we speak. Now we're going to learn a little bit more about what are vocal cords. If you think that vocal cords are like strings on a guitar, you'd be wrong. Actually, vocal cords are vocal folds or many layers of tissue that vibrate in your larynx. You can still use the term vocal cords, however, as both terms mean the same thing. The vocal cords have a V shape. How do we use the vocal cords? To make a high sound, we tighten the vocal cords. To make a low sound, we release the vocal cords. And most people do all this without even thinking. So now the sound is coming through the vocal cords, but the sound isn't a word yet. What happens next is that we use our throat, tongue, mouth, and lips to shape the sound into vowels and consonants. For example, say a word like football or window. Notice how you open your mouth and move it around when you change vowels and consonants. Notice how you move your tongue and change its shape as you speak. You're making a fancy concert of sounds inside your mouth. Speaking seems like the most natural thing in the world, and when we do speak, we rarely, if ever, think about how we create words and sentences. Even so, we aren't born knowing how to make words automatically. And here we have an in-depth look at the larynx, the vocal cord or folds that are in that larynx. The trachea, that's where our oxygen or our wind is coming up from our lungs. And then there's our tongue that helps us to form the words. So now we are going to look at, before we read dogs and birds making noises, we are going to answer the first three questions. So the first question says, what idea do how we speak and what our vocal cords share? So we're looking for something that they both said. Several parts of our bodies work together to let us speak. We can make sounds because we have vocal folds. Your mouth and tongue help you form words. Air travels from the lungs to the voice box. So this, air travels from the lungs to the voice box, was only in the first one, how we speak. Your mouth and tongue help you form vowels was only in the second one, what are vocal cords. And I bet a lot of people are probably thinking the correct answer is B. We can make sounds because we have vocal folds. But vocal folds was only in the second article. The first article talked about vocal cords. So the correct answer should be A. Several parts of our bodies work together to let us speak. In how we speak, it talked about our lungs and our trachea and the vocal cords, the larynx. And in what are vocal cords, it talked about the vocal cords, the tongue, the mouth, talked about all that. All right, now in part B, we need one detail from each story. So first, we're going to get a detail from how we speak that supports several parts of our body work together to let us speak. Speaking is possible because we have special parts in our bodies: lungs, throat, voice box, tongue, and lips. How we speak, when we speak, we release air from our lungs. The larynx, often called the voice box, contains vocal cords that stretch across the opening. So all three of those were in this passage, but which one supports? We have several body parts. Not just one or two, but several. Should be A, because it lists several body parts: lungs, throat, voice box, tongue, and lips. We are not done with this question because we also need to get a detail from the other story, vocal cords, that supports several parts of our bodies working together. So actually, vocal cords are vocal folds or many layers of tissue that vibrate in your larynx. To make a high sound, we tighten the vocal cords. What happens next is that we use our throat, tongue, mouth, and lips to shape the sound into vowels and consonants. So the detail that supports several parts of our bodies working together is letter D, because it lists the different parts: throat, tongue, mouth, and lips. In number 2, you are going to circle the word in the paragraph that means capable of bending easily without breaking. So why can't a dog speak? The big difference is in the dog's anatomy, of the structure of its body. A dog's mouth is not as flexible as a human's. A dog can't move its mouth to make it smaller or roll its tongue in different positions. So after the air passes through the vocal cords, the dog can't change the sound very much. So which word means capable of bending easily without breaking? That should be the word flexible. So you need to circle the word flexible in your paragraph, because that means capable of bending without breaking. It says it's not very flexible. He can't move his mouth. So that means it's not capable of bending without breaking. Now, even though that came from dogs and birds make noises, we could still answer that without reading the whole text, because it was only from a little portion of that text that they wanted the answer to come from. Now we are going to read dogs and birds making noises before we answer the last questions. Animals can make a variety of sounds, from the loud barking of a dog to the sweet song of a bird. How do animals make these sounds? A dog can make quite a few sounds, from whines to loud bark sounds. Scientists say that the dog has vocal cords much like a human's inside the thorax or chest. So why can't a dog speak? The big difference is in the dog's anatomy, or the structure of its body. A dog's mouth is not as flexible as a human's. A dog can't move its mouth to make it smaller or roll its tongue in different positions. So after the air passes through the vocal cords, the dog can't change the sound very much. Birds, on the other hand, can make a wide variety of sounds. Some birds, like parrots, can even imitate human speech. Singing birds have a larynx, but they don't have vocal cords. Instead, a singing bird uses its syrinx to make sounds. The syrinx is in the throat and is made up of membranes, like thin pieces of skin, that form the sounds when air passes through them. Birds can vary the sounds by squeezing or loosening the tension of the muscle in the syrinx. They move their esophagus, windpipe, pharynx, and mouth to vary the sounds. Like humans, birds have to learn how to make these sounds. Some birds, like vultures and some storks, don't have a syrinx, so you'll never hear these birds singing a note. And here we have a picture of the syrinx. There's the bill, his tongue, the larynx, the trachea, the syrinx, and the air sacs. So now that we have read, we can go and answer the question on page 334. What information from what are vocal cords helps the reader understand why dogs can't speak as stated in Dogs, Birds, and Making Noises? People can make higher sounds by tightening their vocal cords and lower sounds by relaxing the cords. Even though we don't often think about how we say words and sentences, we don't learn to speak automatically. People move their mouths to form words from the sounds made by the vocal cords. The vocal cords of a human are not like the strings on a guitar because they have a V shape. So which one of these helps us understand why dogs can't speak? It should be letter C. Because remember, in Dogs Can't Speak, it talked about their voices or their mouths not being as flexible. So people move their mouths to form words from the sounds, but the dog's mouth isn't as flexible and therefore he can't move it. So for our open response, it says, using information from all three sources, explain how humans and animals make sounds. What similarities and differences are pointed out in the three sources? Reread each source and underline details that will help you explain how humans and animals make sounds, then complete numbers 4 and 5. I am not going to make you use the 3-column chart. You can if you want to. It's good practice to go to the first article and write down some ideas or thoughts that you'd like to include in your response from the first article. Then go to the second article, do the same thing in the third article. That's what they mean by doing a 3-column chart. Then you're going to take that evidence and take those ideas and details that you got from the 3 articles and write your response. So make sure in your response, make sure you answer all the points that the prompt tells you to. So how humans and animals make sounds? That's something you need to respond to. Similarities and differences. You need similarities and differences between how humans and animals make sounds. Make sure that you fully answer that prompt. So this is basically like getting you to write a research paper, except you're just writing a research response. The research articles are already provided to you, the 3 that we read. You should go back and reread them and pull out important information from them. And then you're going to write your response. We will do another activity like this next Friday that is for a grade, and this is good practice. If you would like for me to read your response and offer you feedback, then you may take a picture of it after you write it and email it to me, and I will offer you feedback so that you can do better next week when I take one for a grade.